Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the B block or second section of our show. I'm Alaina Pinto. With the US market imploding thanks to the constant delays for rescheduling in this country, Europe is getting more and more attention by US-based investors and operators. The country of Switzerland is in the middle of a public comment period on the proposals in place to become the first European country to create a fully regulated legal adult use sales market. One of the interesting things included in this country's proposed rules is the ban on all vertical operations. There will be separate licenses for growers, manufacturers, and retailers. There is also a nationwide cap of 5 grams of THC in all products. And right now, that country is in the middle of that 3-month public comment period, and they are still quite a few months away from launch. They also need to establish a seed to sale tracking system before they even think about their opening day. But now let's check in on what is going on in England with Dave Barton.
I'm Dave Barton from Thermador with your UK Cannabis report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. A new study from the University of Bath finds that those who use cannabis to self-medicate are apparently at greater risk of paranoia than recreational users. Following a 3-year study and what's said to be the largest survey into cannabis with nearly 3,400 current and former users participating, researchers have published 2 reports. The first considers the implications of self-medicating and recreational cannabis use, while the second looks at the relationship between cannabis and childhood trauma. In both cases, results show that those self-medicating are more susceptible to paranoia. However, it's not made clear if those surveys were medical cannabis patients with a CBPM prescription, black market product consumers, or a mixture of both. Neither is it explicitly stated if any participants had received advice from a medical professional with cannabis-specific expertise. Hardly surprising considering the study was funded by the Medical Research Council of the UK. Can anyone else smell the bullshit here? That's all for this week's UK report. I'm Dave Barton from Thermador, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast News Report. So what we have in Canada this week is in Niagara, BC, we have the Indigenous Cannabis Conference, which will be held from September 14th to 16th of 2025. This is going to be bringing together Indigenous leaders, innovators, as well as policymakers when it comes to discussing cannabis in the entrepreneurship and economic state. And it's also going to be able to provide some great information and some applications for the participants that had attended. Next, what we have is Emblem's Divi infused pre-roll has been recalled due to incorrect labels indicating their THC and CBD content. This is something where over 4,000 pieces have been recalled. And with that being said, we hope that not only everybody has a safe consumption, especially if they had consumed it, but if they haven't, please return it to your local store in order to make sure that they give you something that is actually going to be the proper THC levels and content. This is Debbie Facey with your Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. Peace.
2 more notes from Europe, both from Germany. FC Union Berlin, a German soccer team, is embracing a medical cannabis company as its main sponsor. That new sponsor is Ave Medical, and they have been committed to therapeutic use of high-quality medical cannabis products for years. They're trying to destigmatize cannabis in that European nation by offering an alternative for treatment, especially for those with chronic illnesses. The second news item comes from the political arena, where the new federal drug commissioner, Dr. Enric Streck, is calling for stricter regulations of that country's new legal cannabis industry. He thinks that the current home grow rules are unrealistic and that stricter guidelines regarding the smoking of the product are necessary because of the dangers of smoking. Yes, there are still plenty of battles to be waged in order to free the plant in that country. But back here in the US, there has been a huge data breach in Ohio by the Ohio Medical Alliance that may have exposed the medical records of thousands of patients in that state. Christina Brisson has that story and more out of the Buckeye State.
Hi, I'm Christina Brisson with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Recently, Ohio marijuana cars has been charged negligent with a data breach, leaving their database fully exposed and exposing over 950,000 records with social security numbers, medical IDs, health records, and more. Additionally, Circleville is now looking to expand their moratorium to February 2026. I encourage residents out there to get out to those local city council meetings. We got New Albany has opened a new dispensary, a new Curaleaf dispensary, now open in Westerville technically, but to serve the New Albany area. That is your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report. I am Christina Brisson with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
A new national health poll on aging conducted by the University of Michigan has concluded that baby boomers and Gen X are fueling the cannabis industry in adult use legal sales. In fact, they are reporting that 1 in 5 people over the age of 50 are using cannabis at least once a month. The poll results report that the top 5 reasons older adults use cannabis are to relax, help with sleep, deal with pain, improve their mental health and mood, and finally just to enjoy the effects and feel good. One of the most interesting things this poll showed was that 56% of the older adults have discussed their cannabis with their healthcare providers, while 44% have not. Well, now let's check in with Dina Nagib in California.
I'm Dina Nagib, Principal Consultant at Grass Goddess Consulting, here to give you the latest developments in California for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Big news last week out of Sacramento, where 2 bills passed the Senate Appropriations Committee. The first one, AB 8, integrates naturally occurring, non-intoxicating cannabinoids derived from hemp into the regulated cannabis supply chain. Amy O'Gorman Jenkins, the California Cannabis Operators Association's executive director, said the following about the news. Today's vote is a major victory for public health and consumer safety in California. Assembly Bill 8 closes dangerous loopholes that allow untested, unregulated, intoxicating products to be sold online, at gas stations, and in convenience stores, often reaching minors. The second bill, AB 564, would restore the cannabis excise tax from 19% back to 15% as it was prior to July. This bill has been a roller coaster for operators who were hopeful that it would pass before the increase took effect. After looking like the bill might fail completely, another hurdle has now been passed, and there is renewed hope that the excise tax will go back to 15%. It is important to note that this tax applies to medical patients as well as adult use. And O'Gorman Jenkins stated that this increase pushes patients and consumers to the illegal market where products are untested, untracked, and untaxed. I'm Dina Nagib from Grass Goddess Consulting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Kentucky continues to wait for their first harvest, which will be the trigger to launch their medical program sometime before the end of this year. In the meantime, a hemp company in that state that has a line of infused beverages is sponsoring University of Louisville athletics. Cornbread Hemp is the first company that has stepped up and made some history in the so-called bourbon belt of the world in Kentucky. Louisville is proud of their history as the bourbon capital of the world and now is leading the way in THC-infused beverages. Now, let's check in with Jenny Germano in Colorado.
I am Jenny Germano with ICS Consulting. This is the Colorado Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Loveland residents and city leaders are navigating the green frontier as questions swirl around how regulated cannabis businesses will take root in the community. A recent public meeting revealed more questions than answers, especially when it comes to the licensing rules. Loveland voters passed measures 2F and 2H, authorizing medical and retail cannabis businesses and setting a 5% excise tax on sales in the November 5th, 2024 election. But now the city is facing important challenges. How many licenses should be issued? Who qualifies? And how soon can these businesses get open? At a recent public regulation meeting, the community members and business owners turned out in droves. Their questions highlighted the city task of building a new licensing system from scratch. Public officials outlined plans to nail down eligibility requirements, a cap on the number of businesses, the timelines for license rollout. Still, many of those in attendance voiced their concerns. Uncertainty remains about the eligibility rules, application processes, and when operations actually might begin. City staff emphasized that these conversations are part of a broader regulatory framework in the making, aimed at balancing public safety, community standards, and a business opportunity. It's clear this is just the beginning of what promises to be a closely watched, community-centered discussion. Stay tuned for future reporting and updates on Loveland's evolving cannabis licensing process. I am Jenny Germano with ICS Consulting, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One of the newest states to open a legal adult use market for cannabis is one of the smallest states in the country, Delaware. While that little state is on the East Coast, it did over $7 million in sales in their first month. And according to the regulatory agency that tracks all sales in that state, over 50% of the legal buys were flower-based products. That state allowed their existing medical dispensaries to open up for adult use sales, ensuring that people will have access to the plant on day one. All product, of course, has to be grown inside the state borders of Delaware. There are currently 12 dispensaries that were licensed for medical only, but have been allowed to offer adult use sales now. It's not all great news for pro-cannabis enthusiasts in that state. The governor, Matt Meyer, vetoed a law that would have allowed more locations to open dispensaries for adults by easing zoning restrictions, but for now, the laws will stay the same. Next up, Virginia with Joe Parsons.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection by Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 through WV, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Another top Democratic Virginia senator has come out of the cannabis closet, so to speak, to help initiate the adult use market here in the Commonwealth. With the anticipated increases in spending in Virginia that are the result of various policy initiatives by the Trump administration, such as the withdrawal of federal welfare dollars to states, Senator Louise Lucas, a Democrat, said it's time to get serious about alternative revenue, which should include legalizing marijuana. She also said, "We have an inescapable responsibility to generate and create long-term and sustainable source of revenue to safeguard core programs and services." Now, she's joining efforts similar to that of Senator Paul Krizik, another Democratic cannabis freedom fighter, to open the doorways to get the adult use program up and running as soon as possible. The governor's race is the last hurdle left stopping us from a safe and fair market. I, for one, applaud her continued dedication to not only generate revenue, but to keep Virginia moving in the right direction towards adult use freedom. And a special shout out and thank you to my musical guest this week on Coffee Talk. We were discussing the best weed songs and our favorite. I was lucky enough to get the composer and singer of my favorite weed song to come on the show. William G. Kidd from Utah performed my favorite and a few others for a super fun episode. Now, if you want to know what my favorite weed song is, then log on to www.3wb.com and listen to the episode to find out for yourself. Well, that's going to do it for this week from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB in Charlottesville, and reporting for WPCM TV's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
One thing that has been consistent in the fight to end cannabis prohibition is the fact that legal adult use states continue to rake in tax revenue. While there are always cities and towns that opt out of allowing cannabis dispensaries to set up shop in their area, those that do allow the businesses all enjoy the tax revenue driven by sales. According to a report in the Bay Net in Maryland, that total is now $18 million in the second quarter of this year alone. With more from Maryland, here's the enlightened voice, Christopher Bright.
I'm Christopher Bright from the Enlightened Voice. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'll be bringing you the latest cannabis headlines from Maryland. In a significant ruling, a Fourth Circuit panel has upheld Maryland's social equity mandate for its retail cannabis market. The decision rejected a challenge from California resident Justine Jensen, who argued that a licensing requirement favoring applicants who attended certain Maryland universities discriminates against out-of-state residents. The criterion prioritizes those who study at Maryland colleges where at least 40% of the students qualify for Pell Grants aimed at communities disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. The U.S. Circuit Court Judge Deandra Just Benjamin wrote that the rule does not require Maryland residents, as applicants can qualify through online attendance at one of the 6 eligible schools, including Bowie State and Morgan State. The court found no violation of the U.S. Constitution's Dormant Commerce Clause, dismissing Jensen's claim that the policy favors in-state residents. The panel has also noted that Jensen's delay in seeking an injunction weakened her case. Maryland has already issued 205 conditional cannabis licenses, with 16 meeting the Pell Grant criteria. And now we have our content creator of the week. I would like to shine a spotlight on Ashley, aka Smiley, or Canna Girl Live on IG. As an assistant manager of Chester Canna Dispensary, you can always see her smiling face at the York location. She is knowledgeable about their products and makes reels to showcase them. You can also catch her at most of the events under the Chester Canna tent. Follow her on IG at CannaGirl Live, and don't forget to say hi. And that's been this week's Maryland's Cannabis Report. I'm Christopher Bright from the Enlightened Voice, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the B Block, but Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this break with a report from Minnesota and one of the first open consumption celebrations in that new adult use state. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
What if we're right? What if all of a sudden they discovered that there is medical use for marijuana and that it is good for you and it's better than alcohol and it's better than opioids and it helps your health? What if we're right? What if they find that out?
Specific cannabinoids have medical value. These are facts.
I'm here today in hopes to assist in removing the demonized stigma of cannabis and the perception that cannabis is just about getting high. The true base of this plant has to be known.
I don't think anybody should ever go to jail for cannabis. Get some medicine, and everybody should have access to it.
This is something which, at the very, very least, is the key to alleviating suffering and extending life for millions of human beings. Right? For returning some kind of balance to our society, and quite possibly of restoring our planet's natural balance as well.